First, some news from the world over. On Tuesday, a Vatican prosecutor asked the two priests who served in a pre-seminary inside the Vatican to be ordered to stand trial on charges of sexual abuse. The prosecutor asked judicial superiors to indict Father Gabriele Martinelli on charges of carrying out the abuse, and Father Enrico Radici, the rector of the institution at the time, of aiding and abetting the abuse. The allegations of abuse date back to 2012 at the St. Pius X pre-seminary that houses altar boys between the ages of 14 and 18. They serve masses at St. Peter's Basilica and are considering becoming priests. The Vatican prosecutor began the investigation in 2017 after news of the alleged assaults were reported by media outlets. Reports, however, suggest that the abuse was known inside the Vatican as early as 2014. The allegations against Martinelli have prompted an investigation by civil authorities in Rome as well. Joining me now in Washington with his analysis is the Rome correspondent for the National Catholic Register, Edward Pentin. Ed, thanks for being here. Pleasure to have you back. Now, I want to start with this case. Now, according to the reports, this teenage altar boy accused an older seminarian, Martinelli, of molesting his roommate. Now, several bishops investigated this, yet the victim was never interviewed and police were never called in. Ultimately, the accuser was kicked out of the seminary while Martinelli was made a priest. What have you heard in Rome about this case at this pre-seminary? It's now under investigation.
Yes, well, it's been talked about for a while. I think we've heard about this story. I think Archbishop Vigano mentioned it in his testimony. So we've known about this for a while. But what's interesting, I think, is there's a pattern here, which is that the Vatican will take action once it hits the press and once it makes headlines, and then they really get into top gear about whatever they want to do about it. Yeah. But until that happens, often these cases aren't handled very well, and then it takes the media spotlight to be put on them to do something.
Yeah, the Vigano, you mentioned Archbishop Vigano, and you're quite right. He discussed this case in correspondence with the Washington Post earlier this year, although this was a piece of the original interview that the Post did not run with, and it was leaked to other media outlets, including this one. Now, Vigano claims that a preliminary investigation carried out by the priest was inhibited by superiors. Vigano said the altar boy and two other seminarians described the accusations in writing to cardinals and in 2014 to Pope Francis himself. When accusations first became public in 2017, Cardinal Angelo Comastri, who serves as the Archpriest of St. Peter's Basilica, he's the Vicar General for the Vatican City State, he denied those accusations. Vigano has said that Comastri covered up the case along with others. What do you make of what Vigano is saying here and the Pope being made aware of this abuse? Now, we know he lifted the statute of limitations in July, but was that only because you already had secular investigators exploring this case?
I think that's probably the case, Raymond. I mean, I don't really know the ins and outs of this case, but that certainly sounds plausible. And I think, yeah, I think the Vatican is very keen to deal with these cases, obviously, when they happen, but they want to get the facts right too. So, so I think we have to be cautious about, you know, what we know and what we don't know, and I think they act prudently in the end.
It's a heartbreaker. I mean, this case is a heartbreaker because it happened at a pre-seminary in the Vatican itself, and we're talking here about a minor abuse. It boggles the mind, but I'm glad they're finally investigating. That's a good thing. Now, the head of the German Bishops' Conference, Cardinal Reinhard Marx, announced this week, and I know this is a story you've been covering extensively, Ed, that the Church in Germany would embark on a binding synodal process, a meeting to tackle what he calls the key issues arising from the clerical abuse crisis: clerical celibacy, the Church's teaching on sexual morality, and a reduction of clerical power. The new assembly would be given the authority to pass resolutions in the name of the Church in Germany. Now, the Vatican has said that the proposed makeup of this synodal assembly is not, quote, ecclesiologically valid. That's a tough word. What are the German bishops trying to do here, Ed?
Well, I think they're determined to push through what they see as the way they want the Church to go, which is to have this sort of new morality. And they are very determined. That's one thing about the German bishops we've seen over the years, is that they will push as hard as they can to get this through. And but I also think that there's a pattern here too, because we saw last year the intercommunion debate, where they tried to, or they successfully put out these guidelines about communion for Protestant spouses. That was given the green light by the Pope himself in the end, despite all of the back and forth and the controversy. And then you have also the Amoris Laetitia aspects too, and all of that. And so in a sense, they're kind of reaping what they've sown, the Vatican, because they've not come down and they've not stopped any of this in the past few years. And now it's coming to the point where, what can they do? They haven't said no to these other things. Will they just let them pass this time? And yeah. So.
Well, and they're taking a little opening, you know, in these papal documents or papal pronouncements, and then they suddenly break open a whole new area of church teaching where they're assuming universal power, universal control, usurping the papal authorities.
Exactly.
Really what they're at.
Yes. And I think part of this is because I don't know, but I suspect that they're concerned that another pope will come in who will be conservative, and then that's a problem for them, and they want to get out of that, sort of preempt that by having their own sort of synodal church.
It's a parallel magisterium, is what it is.
That seems to be the case, yeah. But
Cardinal Marx told Vatican officials who did protest what's going on here that this synodal process will continue as planned despite recent instructions from the Vatican Curia and the Pope himself, and it will deal with matters of universal teaching and discipline. He claims the decisions will be helpful for the guidance of the universal church. End quote. How can he get away with this? How does Marx and the German bishops, how do they get away with this? And for all the fake talk of schism here in the United States, it would seem to me that the individuals in Rome, very bright people, no doubt, should be able to see the schism happening before their eyes there in Germany.
But I think a lot of this, sadly, I think a lot of this comes down to money. I think the Vatican, I think, depends to some extent on German finance as well. We don't know this for sure, but I think there's certainly an element of that, and so they have this freedom really to push this sort of universal thing. But this is the way they see the church going. This is the way they want it to go, and it's also for self-preservation, I think, in Germany, because they've compromised the secular world because of the church tax, because of all of that, and this is just a fruit of that, I think.
Yeah, I am aghast at the lack of criticism from the same parties who are coming up with these tall tales and fabulous sagas of conspiracy theories in the United States and a well-financed cabal, but they completely ignore this German and actual usurpation, to my eye, of papal power and authority. They are becoming their own magisterium, and nobody's saying a word about this.
No, that's right.
Even here in America, I mean, some of our critics, they're saying nothing, nothing.
Yes. No, it's incredible really to watch, because, and this is where it's going to be a real standoff, because the Pope, of course, he wrote, people forget that he wrote a letter to the bishops in July, I think, saying don't go down this path. I think the letter was in fact drafted by Cardinal Casper.
Right.
And then you've got Cardinal Willett of the Congregation of the Bishops also warning them, and they're still going ahead with this. Yeah. So it's going to come to blows, I think, at some point.
Well, here's the difficulty. At the same moment that the Vatican and Cardinal Marx are exchanging letters over this proposed synod of sorts in Germany, Pope Francis has ordered Vatican officials to close a widening budget deficit at the Holy See. In a letter to Cardinal Marx, the same Cardinal Marx we just talked about, who is the head of the Vatican's Financial Oversight Council, Pope Francis has asked him to inform respective heads about the gravity of the situation and find immediate remedies. Now, Marx has called for an extraordinary meeting of the Vatican department chiefs for September 20th to address this issue. The German synod is scheduled a few days later. Why is Marx running the Vatican finances while setting up a parallel magisterium?
Well, this is the good question. I mean, you know, one has to join the dots in a sense. But I do wonder, you know, is there this strong connection between finances in the German church and the need for the Vatican to be financed because of the shortages that they have and this deficit that you mentioned? So there does seem to be a connection there. But that's something I think a few of us need to look into and really find that out.
What are the state of the Vatican finances at this point? One would imagine the sex abuse scandal has taken its toll on the universal church as it has for many of the local churches around the world.
Well, from what I hear from my sources, that the finances have gone on a completely backward direction from when Cardinal Pell was there, and that everything that had been done in the first few years of this pontificate had been undone. All the powers have been stripped away from the
Financial Secretariat
for the economy, and now, but there are signs, perhaps signs that that's changing. I think the new Sostituto, basically the Deputy Secretary of State, Archbishop Edgar Pena-Parra, is apparently doing some good things to try and clean up some of the Vatican finances, but there are some real concerns there about the way the Vatican finances are at the moment, and the health of it.
Speaking of the portent of schism in the Church that we're seeing in Germany, I want to ask your opinion, because you are probably best disposed to address this. There is this pronounced narrative that we've heard, and it's really in recent months, that there is an American cabal, an organized cabal, well-financed, we keep hearing. I'd love to see where those finances are, you know, coming from. And the one person they keep mentioning in all the articles, I don't think he has that much money, but okay, let's put that aside. Let's put the facts aside. Where is this narrative coming from, Ed? Is it coming from those closest to the Pope? Is it coming from people trying to seek favor with the Pope and explain why certain initiatives aren't working? What's the source of this?
Well, it's hard to say, but I think it's coming from the people close to him. And for me, it's kind of shocking, because it's a complete slander and smear, and it's complete lies that are coming out from around the Pope. And I've never seen this before. I mean, it's incredible to me. And, you know, if there is a plot, it's the plot to call people names and to have the same narrative each time.
Right.
But it's a complete myth. Everything they say about this whole plot is a complete myth. And in fact, I was talking to someone close to the Pope's circle only recently, and he was very candid with me, and I said, you know, I tried to tell them there's no plot, you know, this is crazy. All people are wanting is the truth and orthodoxy, and they want the direction of the Church to go down an orthodox path.
And clarity. They're asking for clarity and
yes.
asking questions about genuinely confusing points of doctrine or practice, which is licit.
Exactly. So there's no, I mean, I think Father Sosa, the head of the Jesuits, said, oh, it's because they want to influence the next conclave. But it's complete nonsense. There's nothing like that. People are just generally concerned about the direction of this pontificate. And this official, he said, very candidly, he said, oh, well, it helps to sell books, you know. And so this is what we're dealing with. It's a lot of, unfortunately, there's a lot of lies and untruths that are coming out from parts of the Vatican now, and it's very sad to see.
No, and it seems there's a group of papal courtiers who are seeking influence, and they are all parroting this line. There are a number of books coming out that are echoing this American cabal narrative in various iterations. They all slightly differ, but the principles tend to be the same. And the general plot is this group is against Pope Francis and his reforms of the Church. Now, when I step back and look at this, my concern is, who is benefiting from this narrative? Who benefits, Ed?
Yes. Well, I think, as I say, it helps to sell books, as we heard, but I think it helps to sort of neutralize the critics, and I think they don't know quite how to deal with those who, and we're only reporting the criticism, but they don't really understand, they don't really know how to deal with the criticism, I think. And this is a kind of desperate attempt, I think, to try and find a way to completely silence them by throwing out these falsehoods.
Well, and the cruel thing that I see, I mean, just as a journalist, you take a slander, you throw it out. Mr. Horowitz at the New York Times throws it out at the Pope, and the Pope takes the bait, and in commenting on it, lends credence to the slander, whether he intends it or not. It elevates the slander, and now it's a storyline. So now these books have runway to run on. Now, personally, and I'll stake a reputation on this, these books will not sell because no one cares. The sad reality is, because of the scandal, because of the corruption, the financial, the sexual, and all the rest, I think a good number of even serious Catholics, they've simply tuned out. Now, I have some data to prove that. I won't get into it here or now, maybe later. But certainly the financial statements reflect that. But I am astounded at the ferocity of this narrative and how it's caught on mostly in the European press. It really hasn't caught the same fire here in America.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's taken on a life of its own, but But as you say, it doesn't have a lot of traction. I think a lot of people can see through it, and they see that this is not true, and that, you know, there are genuine concerns about the direction of this pontificate. And I think they can see that the critics are not against the Pope, they're not against the Church. They love the Church, they love the papacy, they love the Pope, but they're concerned about the direction that the Church is going down. And that's all it is. That's all, as far as I can see.
No. These people, I mean, many of these people are you know, who've raised these concerns, whether it be Cardinal Mueller or Cardinal Sarah. They're at the end of their careers. There's nothing. They're not getting anything out of this, except trying to establish, what do we believe now? And what do we teach our children? And for me as a father, that's important. I want to move on to Cardinal George Pell. This is a story you've been covering. We've both been covering for years now. Cardinal Pell of Australia sent an application to the Australian High Court to appeal his guilty verdict in that sex abuse case. Now, there's no guarantee that the High Court will give him permission to appeal. The High Court does not grant these leave applications to appeal regularly. What are your thoughts on his possibility of just getting the freedom to appeal?
Well, this is going to play out over a period of time. We've got to wait for 3 weeks, I think, until the prosecution reply to this application, and then Cardinal Pell has a week for him to reply, and then we get the decision from the High Court, and that's going to take probably until early next year. But I've heard that the chances of an appeal succeeding are pretty slim. But his lawyers are pinning their hopes on the fact that, you know, there was that split decision of upholding the conviction in August.
One of the three judges.
One of the three was very strongly had strong reservations about the conviction. And so it's not beyond reasonable doubt. And so I think there is a real case here. They believe there's a real case that they could succeed, and there's a lot riding on this. You
have been covering the refounding of the John Paul II Institute on Family and Marriage in Rome. This has been a story that's gotten a lot of coverage in the Catholic press, very little outside. Give us a sense. Well, I want to share this with our audience just so they're up to date. Last week, two new professors, Father Maurizio Chiodi and Father Pierre David Guenzi, were brought in. Now, both of these men have views on homosexuality and contraception that are at odds with the church teaching. Chiodi most recently suggested that under certain conditions, quote, homosexual relationships can be the most fruitful way for same-sex attracted persons to enjoy good relations, end quote. How is this being received in Rome and by students at these John Paul II institutes?
Well, the students that I've spoken to and some of the people there, they feel it's a profanation. They feel it's completely nothing to do with this institute. I mean, this kind of views, that they'd have to change the name of the institute if these sort of views are going to be taught. So there's a lot of concern about this. Others say, well, if you read what they say, it's very intellectual. You've got to really see that, you know, they're trying to find ways of being pastoral to practicing homosexuals or whatever. So there is that. And then I think you've got to look at both sides, but I think there is real concern. Also with Father Chiodi talking about the need for contraception, that some cases contraception could be allowed, drawing on Amoris Laetitia. I mean, this was something that he said in very intellectual terms, so it's very difficult to know exactly what he was saying, but that seemed to be the case. And so that's a lot of concern there.
Now, obviously, this is coming from within the Vatican. Archbishop Paglia is the head of this refounded institute, reconstituted, I think is the word he used, institute. My question is, why not just found the Pope Francis Institute for Family and Pastoral Care and leave the John Paul II Institute to its own devices and to move in its own trajectory?
Well, I mean, some say that, you know, evil has to have something to feed upon. I don't want to say that that's totally what's going on here, but you know, you wonder whether they're using this in order to, because there's the structure there already for them to build upon.
And a brand.
And a brand.
An important brand,
But you know, one must hear their side too, and you know, I think maybe there are some justified reasons for it, but I don't think so. I think you've seen the protests and the petitions. Over 200 professors worldwide signing a petition complaining about the changes. So I think there's some serious problems that need answering.
Before I let you go, and we keep hearing all the critics of the Holy Father, all the people asking these questions are coming from America. There was a piece you reported on this week, Vittorio Mussoorie, the well-known journalist, did a number of books for Cardinal Ratzinger that when he was Pope Benedict and subsequently. He had some interesting comments on what he was hearing from bishops all around the world and in Rome. What did he say?
Well, he said that he's heard a lot of concern about what's going on. I mean, people often try to... that I speak to, they say, oh, well, you know, it's not so serious. But that's not what I hear. And it's not what he's heard either. And he says there are many cardinals and bishops who, in private, have said that they're pulling their hair out about what's happened and are desperate. But he also said, you know, Christ never leaves his church alone, and we have to remain hopeful. And I think that's an important point, too. In fact, I was talking to a historian only yesterday about how who's an expert on the Reformation, and he was saying, you know, that we've had serious crises before, times of 3 popes, of great schisms, and, you know, the church has survived, and we have to trust in God that's going to happen, and the church will see it through. It's happened before.
Hope, a wonderful place to end. Ed Pentin, safe travels back to Rome. Thank you so much for being here. I hope to have you back soon. You can catch Ed's reporting at ncregister.com. He's really one of the best in the business. Follow him on Twitter at Edward Pentin.